for the invitation, Ashley. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. I hope everyone can hear me well. So I work for Tech UK, and we are a trade body. And we've got about 850 companies representing the tech sector in the UK. So we're not government, so I'm not speaking on behalf of government, but obviously in my day-to-day role, I engage with government and key stakeholders. What I thought I would do a quick overview of the UK fintech scene, explain some of the drivers of changes in the UK, and focus a bit on one key regulatory change that happened in Europe, open banking, and finish off with some consideration with regards to cyber and the fraud risk in the current context, as I know we'll be talking about this as well. But to kick off, I would like to talk about the fintech, the UK fintech scene. In the UK, we've got a wide range of firms from startups, really small companies, pre-revenue companies, and some larger companies, because fintech is not just the startup, it's larger companies. Technology is now being used in the UK and Europe and across the world in financial services. Government reports estimate in the UK, we have about 1,600 fintech firms. We expect this to double by 2030. So fintech is really growing very fast in the UK and worldwide. In the UK, we've got about 75 to 100,000 people working in fintech. And obviously, one of the key drivers in the UK has been that the fact that the UK, and specifically London, is a big financial services hub. So having many financial services company has helped create a vibrant ecosystem. London is one of the world's highest concentration of financial firms in the world. We've got about 64,000 financial firms and professional firms in London alone. So the UK fintech scene has really grown a lot in the last few years and has been doing very well. And last year, the UK fintech raised about $5 billion, which is about the same amount of completed deals in the top 10 EU countries combined. So the UK, thanks to the financial services hub it is, has managed to create a vibrant ecosystem. And I wanted to talk briefly about some drivers of changes that we're seeing in the UK and in the world. One key driver of change has been people. The demand. Customers are seeing the impact of technology. They can access technologies in their life, and they're demanding more from the services they were used to be provided. And that has a big impact on the services that are being provided by firms. And also, one aspect has been the new market entrants, increasing competition in the market. So it's both the customers' demand, but also the offer that has been driving many changes in the fintech ecosystem. But also another key driver of change has been regulators and government in association with the industry. And in Europe, one big regulatory change has been open banking, which has proven to be a very fertile environment for fintech. Open banking is to put consumers and customers back in control of their data and therefore back in better control of their money. Open banking is a secure way for customers to share some of their financial data with fintech, third-party providers that use in return some technologies such as AI, machine learning, and provide better or new services. And that created an ecosystem thanks to these regulatory changes. And I wanted to talk about open banking, because in open banking, we're seeing many trends that we're seeing in fintech overall. We're seeing non-financial services providers coming into the market. We're seeing collaboration between traditional banks and fintech. We're seeing the growth of fintech become bigger, an association between different fintech. We're seeing data sharing with having a bigger and bigger impact across the fintech industry. And also in open banking, we're seeing the entrance of the impact data sharing can have when we combine data, use technology. And in the UK, we are now considering expanding open banking to other sectors and seeing the power of data on fintech across the piece. And also, I wanted to talk about the power of data sharing and open banking, because we talked about ID, and open banking is a way to share data. And it could, there is a use case to use open banking combined with identity. I wanted to finish off, because I'm conscious of the time, about cyber and fraud risk, especially in the COVID-19 context. Because it's not just firms using technology. Sadly, fraudsters are also using technology. So firms have had to step up their game and use technologies to fight the new challenges. And with more people working from home, more companies having to do digital services, it is important in a world where people are more and more online and where people are sharing more and more data, that we have the framework in place to fight the cyber risk and the fraud risk. So I touched about the UK fintech scene, how it's changing, the growth of the UK fintech scene, some of the drivers of changes, and the impact some regulatory frameworks environment can impact and help the development of fintech. So I'm conscious of the time. So I hope that that nutshell was helpful for more conversation on this topic.
Thank you very much, Hugo. Yes, we hopefully have a broader conversation amongst the panelists. But now I'd like to go on to Yasin Al-Tamimi, Chief Exec of Zain Cash. And Yasin, I shall let you speak.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for having me. And hope everyone's keeping safe, and thanks for all the attendees. So I'll start off by giving you just an overview about Iraq from a fintech perspective and the population and the use of digital payments, just to give everyone an overview. So Iraq has 40 million population. 32 million of those currently are unbanked, so they only use cash. And 8 million now are banked, but still these 8 million, the group of the 8 million, even when they're banked, they're using their cards only for cash out. By meaning, once they get the salaries, once you open an account for them, as soon as they get their salaries, they'll go to the ATMs, cash out the money, and then continue their journey in cash. Now, this is obviously very damaging for the country, and as much as they're trying to move people into the banking system, they're still struggling. But also, I want to point out that Iraq, in terms of ATM to population ratio, Iraq has the lowest in the region. So currently they have 4 ATMs to 100,000 people. Let's say compared to the UAE that has around 70 ATMs to 100,000. Also in terms of banking branches, Iraq has 5 to 100,000. So for every 100,000, you only have 5 branches, despite that Iraq has 70 banks. And that's also very, very low compared to the region. Now, this basically says, first off, in terms of the bank population is still very low, and the banking system is still very weak in Iraq. But if we look on the other hand, in terms of technology, Iraq has mobile penetration above 100%. You might question, why is it above 100%? A lot of people hold multiple SIM cards, so the number goes up. So everybody has a mobile phone nowadays. And of those mobile phones, we're saying around 50% are smartphones. And that number is obviously growing exponentially while having cheap smartphones. Also, in terms of internet, 60 million people in Iraq have Facebook. So if you look at the environment of Iraq, you'll say fintech makes total sense. Everybody has smartphones, everybody's using the internet, but no one has bank accounts. And banking is so important in everyday life. So this is how Zain Cash started. We obviously saw the success in countries in Africa. And then the central bank says, hey, we're looking for ways to increase financial inclusion. They reached out to the telco operators, and that's how we started work. And now as we started in early 2016, it's been 4 years that we're growing. We reached almost $1 billion in transaction. I know that's very low relative to other countries in the world, but it's very big compared to Iraq. We never expected to grow that exponentially in Iraq. We're adding more and more users every day, and especially in this period where people now are more aware of how important digital payment is for their own health. We're seeing more coming in, more businesses, not only for health, more businesses are seeing it is also difficult, how cash is super difficult. The thing is, it's very hard to change habits, especially in the Arab world. People, once they stick to a certain habit and if it works, they just don't fix it. If it's not broken, it's not fixed, despite all these benefits. So now this is a period where we're trying to shine, and we are shining this period. We're trying to do as much as we can to provide to businesses and individuals a way to utilize payments and see the reward of it. We're seeing the central bank, there's a discussion that we had. The central bank is more under pressure because of the environment, and they're making quicker decisions than they did before. And also the Ministry of Health is very much supportive of digital payments. So now they're taking more concrete or material actions to get everyone on board to not only open bank accounts. We want the whole system to turn digital for multiple benefits, whether it's health, it's efficiency, it's economy benefits, and so forth. So I hope this gives an overview about how Iraq is, and us as a Zain Cash, as a mobile wallet, what we're doing. An overview of our certain numbers. We have 5,000 agents across Iraq. This is extremely important. These are more or less our branches that enables cash in, cash out. We actually offer most of the services available everywhere, whether it's enabling companies to disperse salaries. We are the biggest UN partner in helping them to disperse funds to beneficiaries. That's the displaced individuals and refugees. We did Iris Cash Out with them. And there's a lot more services such as bill payment and QR code that we rolled out to the market, and there's a lot more to come.
Yasin, thank you. Are you at liberty to say what your ambition is as an entity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking to be the first and the biggest digital bank in Iraq. We're hoping to do that across the region, given Zain Cash is available in multiple countries. We are changing the way the banking industry is working. Currently in Iraq, it was very traditional, very old school. I mean, just think about the UK 40 years ago, how banks were. I mean, most of you were not born 40, 50 years ago, but if you see it on TV, how people actually go into banks, and it's very paper-based, it's all cash-based. That's how banks are there today. But we don't have to take it step by step. With technology, you can leapfrog. Everybody has a mobile phone. It's very easy to develop technology. You don't have to be in the country to get the best talent, although we find great talent in Iraq to help us. So we're looking to leapfrog, become a digital bank, enable from salary disbursement to the use of money, to transfer, to payments, and so forth, to QR code. So we want to have a complete cashless society with a digital currency. And I think we have the right elements and qualities to do it.
Thank you very much indeed. We might come back to that question later. But now we bring in Ian Taylor from MasterCard. And Ian, you particularly work with governments, and I think it'd be very interesting to hear your view of the cashless future and what you're doing in MasterCard.
Ashley, thank you. And also thank you everybody for joining. My role is very much supporting those of our country operations in Europe to engage with governments. Our involvement extends to payments both in and out of government, so taxes, fees and fines being collected, and also salaries and welfares and pensions being paid out. And the appeal in some ways of fintech, particularly in developing markets, but certainly in all markets, is, let me be very honest, MasterCard's role is ensuring that the payment side is most effectively realized. But that said, it is unfortunately the most challenging, not only dealing with governments, but also encouraging governments to ensure that partnerships with private sector enterprises such as MasterCard are seen in a positive light. Let me just sort of try and at least position Iraq, perhaps in terms of our overall global view. Some 80% of all retail transactions still take place in cash, and as Yazid still mentioned earlier on, there are a significant number. We reckon some 2 billion adults still have no formal access to financial services. And so as a consequence, the appeal of fintech in developing countries is very, very clear. Unfortunately, it's very clear to those of us who actually operate in what one might consider the more developed world. It would seem natural, it would seem straightforward, it would seem very easy. But as far as government's concerned, it's very much a question of trying to work with what they have. And clearly in Iraq, the challenges are probably greater than in many other markets. But the appeal of fintech, certainly in developing markets, is very clear. It builds a financial inclusion for citizens at a lower cost. It increases GDP and tax revenues, not necessarily a favorite one amongst traders and merchants, I can agree. It reduces corruption, it reduces money laundering, it reduces fraud. In terms of personal safety, people who have to carry large amounts of cash around, there is always a huge opportunity for theft and robbery, etc., by carrying and keeping cash at home. So it removes a huge element of that. It also increases the speed and the efficiency of the economy by increasing the level of fintech-related payments. My focus, certainly working with governments in Europe, is finding that governments is the crucial element. They have a major role to play, and part of my job is supporting our individual markets to ensure that they see that there is benefit in working with the private sector. Governments across Europe and across the world, in terms of fintech and payments more broadly, have a very strong role to play in terms of influencing and encouraging the country's infrastructure. I'm sure that'll come on to be an issue in the discussion to come, but the infrastructure not just relating to banking, but also in terms of internet provision, in terms of the power supply, in terms of ensuring security, etc. It also has a very strong role, the government, in terms of increasing and encouraging the use of fintech, of digital payments, of data analytics, artificial intelligence, EID, electronic identity, again, something that I'm sure may come up soon. But all of those areas can be facilitated and can be encouraged by a positive government attitude and a positive government approach. And not least, government can take the lead. And we, again, wherever we're working across Europe and many other parts of the world, try to ensure that as a first step, government activity, whether it's applying for a driving license or a passport or paying utility bills, paying your taxes, receiving your pension, all of that should be not only digital, but should be, if at all possible, online. And again, you can see that there are significant challenges in offering those services as a government when it comes to talking about Iraq. I think just to sort of conclude my short part in terms of a formal element, I think we have to recognize that the needs are great. The private and the public sectors, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, do need to work much more closely together to harness technology and expertise and bridge that gap between the development and technology. It's particularly true in Iraq, but it's certainly true in every single market that I work in, whether it's the UK, whether it's Serbia, whether it's Portugal or Latvia, all have a mindset shift to make in terms of trying to work together with the private sector, but also understand what the private sector can offer. It's more a question of the issue of what's feasible, what is actually practical, not necessarily what's just possible. And the reality is in the field, again, unfortunately, something I'm not familiar with in Iraq, but the realities in the field can quickly dampen the excitement and enthusiasm that we may have for bringing around a greater use of fintech in Iraq. We're all enthusiastic about the ability for fintech, for data analytics, for blockchain, all of these things, but when it comes to it, it's only a question of what can function in an online environment. And in the majority of cases, there are still some very basic practical measures that need to be put in place in all markets, not just Iraq, in order to take to make the maximum use and advantage of fintech. That's it for now, and I'll be come back again, obviously.
Thank you very much, Ian. Interesting subject there, and of course talking about security and online fraud, etc. Handing over now to Botan Osman, Chief Executive of Restrata, who's going to take a slightly different angle in terms of safety and online security. And over to you, Botan.
Actually, thanks, and hello to all the participants and the attendees. Great for you all to join, and thanks for IBBC for organising this this topic. I guess quite a slightly different angle for me. I think this crisis has highlighted to all of us what is truly possible when it comes to digital technologies, and we're just scratching the surface as companies are getting used to sort of what's going on. But it's also shown how things can be adopted, how quickly things can be adopted if the political will or the urgency is in place. And certainly COVID-19 has created that urgency for the environment, for governments and people and businesses to act sort of quickly. So I think if any government or company was sort of considering digitizing parts of their business over the last few years, now is really the time, because clearly physical presence is a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for the next 18 to 24 months. And therefore digital enables you to get around that. So I think, in the case of Iraq, I think this is particularly important because we know that government services, whether in person for businesses or for citizens, is almost impossible to access online, never mind pay for online with good services like Zain Cash. And therefore, I think if this does one thing, it hopefully will encourage the acceleration of that, because otherwise you're in a situation where as a government you are no longer able to really serve your citizens because they physically can't come to your offices and fill in the paperwork and the stamping that you need. And so I think that's a clear one. And I think on the other side, if you are a company, an example of an energy company that is trying to operate now all of a sudden remotely in multiple countries, having to deal with sort of different significant drops in manpower, having a reduced visibility because they no longer have people in Iraq, at the level that they used to. Having control over these operations is sort of key, control and visibility. And again, where sort of digital services comes in. And I think, although this crisis is extremely tough from a financial and economic perspective, I think there's no doubt that it's broken some of the paradigms that used to exist around the fact that digital communications, this type of conference would have taken a few months to organize, and we would have all had to fly. Hopefully we'll be able to get at least 70% of the impact that we were going to get in a physical conference. And so I think more and more companies and governments will realize that remote work via digital means is a reality. And so we've probably skipped ahead 4 or 5 years of that paradigm shift, and it's time to take advantage of that and start to kind of try and focus. And so I think ultimately, businesses are trying to adopt, to accelerate their digital adoption, whether that is via digital payments coupled with digital services, if they're able to, and really they need to do it in order to survive and sort of try and thrive in this environment. So with that in mind, as a business, we really, as Restrata, we provide software and services focused on safety, security, and crisis management, mainly on the to the energy and industrial sector. Although our client set is broader than that, but our key area is in critical sectors. And we've seen that our clients around the world, whether in the UK, in the Middle East, in Iraq, and elsewhere, have been significantly impacted by having these overnight moves to everybody sort of working from home, and the double shock of the oil price being what it is. And so we've tried to focus in and help them in launching a resilience from home strategy, and helping with the tool sets that we've got with these clients. And I'll use a few of those examples just to outline how it works. So from a UK and Iraq perspective, we have clients where we help prepare, manage, and respond to the things that they do, to the operations that they have. and they're no longer able to do those. They were always ready for business continuity and to deal with certain crises, but actually, scenarios of every single person working from home and then dealing with a major crisis were not exercised very often. And so we very quickly worked with our clients to help them exercise, dealing with a crisis from home, which brings about a whole set of new challenges for them. And then you move on to being able to manage an operation remotely. I think one of the things, especially in Iraq, with the typically a large percentage of the organizations working there have people working in those organizations that are not necessarily from Iraq, and therefore they may have had to be repatriated to their homes as COVID-19 sort of settles in. That creates a whole new challenge of how do I see what my operations look like and enable the management of them when I don't have the digital tools to help me. So, we were quite fortunate that about a year ago, we launched the Restrada platform that kind of helps energy companies manage the safety and security of their people and the overall mobility of operations, which is now enabling some of our clients in Iraq and elsewhere to understand, where are my people, how are my operations running, and all via the cloud, and to be able to manage things remotely. Whereas, being in a control room previously, taking that for granted, being in an office environment, now you can get the kind of visibility that you would have had, from home. And this is the kind of things that digital technologies are I think, bringing to the table. So I think overall we've seen, hopefully, we can see this. Of course, this is an opportunity in some cases, but it's a humongous challenge from an economic perspective. And so any piece of advantage that organizations can have by being slightly more digital, they should take on at this initial stage, because every assessment says that this is probably an impact that's going to last for the next 12 to 18 to 24 months in some way, shape or form, depending on where you operate. So I think my hope is that companies operating in Iraq and the Iraqi government, as well as sort of the local private sector, can jump on the kind of services that Zain Cash and others are putting on the table to digitize what they do very quickly, because otherwise you'll soon find yourself in an environment where it's almost too late, where if you're not prepared, you can't move. And I think the second angle is the low oil price will mean the new operating cost environment for most of the companies operating in Iraq. And so, can we continue to afford the kind of the expensive ways of operating that we've kind of been used to in Iraq, whether that's for security services or others? Or do we want to change those by introducing a level of digital technology that gives you the visibility that you need, by providing outsourced managed services via digital control rooms, etc.? I think all of that presents a real challenge for the business community and the government community in Iraq. I think the key takeaway here is that we've got 6 months or less to kind of quickly change, whether it's the policies in government, whether it's the adoption of cashless payments, because I think beyond that it'll be a chance wasted, and companies will find themselves starting to be unable to operate at the cost required in Iraq. So I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to touch on those few key points. Hopefully an opportunity, but obviously within a wrapper of lots of challenging situations.
Thank you very much, Botan. A great summary there. Obviously, now is the time. And what's interesting about fintech and technology is we think of it as a sort of special thing. Actually, what is important is having the government, the regulation, the trust, and the consumer behavior that sits behind all this. And I just wondered if we could examine a few things. For example, the role of government in regulation, the cost to government and companies, and consumer trust. We talked in a warm-up earlier about the banks and why people aren't necessarily embracing them enough. And if you could maybe articulate this in some way, maybe Ian, would you like to talk about the cost to governments and, for example, the cost of security versus other lower cost things in terms of transactional costs? And then maybe Yazin would like to follow that up.
Yes, I mean, cost is always an issue when you come to dealing in partnerships with private companies. In order to be sustainable, in order to continue investing in high technology areas, particularly things like security, fraud, authentication, and identity. Private sector does need to make money. It doesn't need to make huge profits, but it does need to make money. And as a consequence, that's usually something that governments find very difficult to swallow. And trust me, that's not just Iraq, that's across the world. But there comes a time when people also in government realize that the status quo has a cost. Even, for example, with cash, there are significant unseen costs that in most cases governments and merchants and consumers don't really take account of. Somebody has to print it, somebody has to produce it, somebody has to transport it, somebody has to count it, somebody has to recover it when it's stolen. There are significant cost areas that actually do have a factor and should be taken account of when dealing with the overall cost. Inevitably, when it's dealing with government, there are ways and means, usually because of the scale of payments, that mean that the individual price, for example, for a single transaction, can get down into the pennies, because they will be paying billions and billions and billions of dollars or euros in terms of salaries to the public sector workers. They'll be receiving tens of billions of pounds or euros or dollars in taxes. So again, the scale means that inevitably the transaction costs in government can be very low. I would stress, though, that when it becomes more sophisticated and when operating more at scale, then those costs obviously can come down. At the very beginning, it does require partnership with private organizations to say, okay, well, for a 12-month period or for a 2-year period or for a 3-year period, there'll be no charges, but inevitably there will have to be a guarantee that there will be, charges at some point in time in order to recoup the investment that's been made. So there are ways and means of working with governments to ensure that cost should not be a prohibitive factor in any element of fintech or the digital payment industry.
Yasin, for you, your point of view, how can you enable low-cost transactions for your consumers?
Now, Ian covered a great point of why cash is very expensive, whether it's on the government, on the private sector. And besides the cost of cash, we're seeing also a lot of people adopting it for monitoring and fraud reasons. There's a question that I keep on looking at from Hamad Al-Uzri about the insurance against fraud while we're speaking about security. The insurance or the measures against fraud and digital payments in Iraq is very similar to any other country, whether it's systems that we put in place. Usually it's PCI environments, which is, let's say, a global setup for security for MasterCard and Visa cards. We do the same with the same standards for the mobile wallet. Also, with any payments, there's always the OTPs and the one-time password that you get to your mobile phone, like verified by Visa or Master Secure Code. And so far, I think obviously fraud that could come from cash is a lot higher from fraud probability of digital payments. Now that we covered the cost, now in terms of what can we do for us to lower the cost, we at this stage and for the long term, our main objective is to get users and engagement into our system. So we're not looking for immediate profits. We're looking for more growth in our transactions, more users to come and become active, not only come and get their salaries on their cards or on their wallets and then cash out and move on back to cash. We want more engagement. And then once we do so, then we will look for minimal profits to continue having a robust service. Now, for us, the way we work, we have agents across Iraq, and that's why we can have a great network. So we have 5,000 agents across Iraq. These agents don't belong to us. So these agents are, let's say, small stores, mom and shops, let's say exchange offices, that they would help us and they become an agent of ours. They would have a mobile wallet where they can conduct a cash in or a cash out. And these individuals will require a certain fee from any cash in and cash out. So once we lower that cost as much as we can, we would add something very minimal for the operational cost. But then the objective is not to make immediate profits, is to get more users, acquisitions, and then we can consider profits later on. Now, actually, I want to also touch on a very important part that you mentioned is the trust. This is a big challenge in Iraq. So the reason that, let's say, 8 million people out of the 40 million get their salaries on a bank account, but then immediately 99% of those cash out their money, and then they usually do, and I've heard these real stories from finance savvy individuals. They would cash out their money from the account and they would keep that cash in their homes. And I was very curious on why would they keep it in their home. They think keeping it under their beds or whatever it is much safer than keep it in the bank because of previous incident that happened with banks in Iraq where they don't have the trust, especially in Iraq as an environment of the wars that happened, the high risk. Everybody is living and is not trusting the system around. There's obviously a lot of corruption reputation around banks, government, etc. And this is very hard to remove from the society. So a lot of people do trust having their cash under their beds than having in the banks. Now, we're trying to help that. Obviously, we tried, education is very important. The central bank is very important, giving them a bit of security. If something happens, what's my benefits? What's my insurance against this? A significant reason to keep the money in the bank, whether it's savings, a better way of checking and monitoring your accounts. Now, this is something that's also very new. It might sound very basic to many of you that you can check your balance easily. I'd say 5, 6, 7 years ago, you can only check your balance if you make a call or you go to the bank. So there's certain measures that we're actually putting in place as a mobile wallet and as a central bank and as other banks to get more people to trust the system, but it will definitely take a longer time. And this is the time where Botan mentioned is that this is the time where companies and government needs to embrace digital payments, mainly for cost reasons. Now they cannot afford paying in cash. It's impossible while you're home and you cannot move around to move cash around. And it's very important to maintain the business going, whether it's a payment collection. Internet companies, they would need to collect payments for their services, or they need to disperse salaries. And that's where we're standing out and people are seeing the real benefits of it.
Thank you very much, Yazden, which actually brings me on to this idea of different forms of banking services coming and different players. Hugo, maybe you'd like to comment, particularly on the FANGs or the Amazons and the Googles of the world, and Zain, for example, are not traditional banking organizations. Could you tell a little bit about that, your observations?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I would just pick up on the point about trust. I think trust is very paramount and very important. And it's an issue on a very important issue that is even important in the UK development of new initiatives. The reason why contactless payments is being used more and more widely in Europe, in the UK, and across the world is because it works, is being implemented with trust frameworks, and it does work, and there's a proof that it works, and that's why people use it. So it's very important. Trust is really important for the takeoff of any new initiatives. And for with open banking, there's been a lot of work with government and industry to make sure the sharing of data is secure, then consumers feel safe in sharing their data. And the companies in open banking, Fintech, have been authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So I think trust is paramount in any new initiatives. So I think I just wanted to highlight and stress the point that trust is really important. And in the UK and Europe too, when we look at new initiatives, we think about trust because there's no point developing new services and initiatives if customers are not going to adopt the new products and services. So I just wanted to highlight the trust point. And about the fintech development, indeed, in the UK and in the world, and what we're going to see in the coming years in financial services is non-traditional players coming into the market and starting to provide services. I mean, Apple is launched its card in the US. I saw Google is also will also come into the market. So we're seeing many more players coming into the market. And what I think we're going to see in the coming years and across the world, and Australia is doing it, we're seeing China as well, is the crossover between different sectors on the power of data, on data sharing, the data sharing between telecommunication, financial services, and on the power of combining different data to help people manage their money better, manage their subscription better, and ensuring that they get the service they want, that is tailored for them, and also then that they do manage to pay for the service provided. So I think that we're seeing in the UK, regulators and government is working on it, and other countries like Australia, I know is working on it. So I think it's going to be a big trend in the coming years. Is the power of data and the link between different sectors together. But for that to happen, trust is a key issue that need to be overcome, and make sure we've got the trust framework, the security around it, so there's no fraud, and there's no like cyber risks, and people can trust it and use it.
Thank you very much. Now we've got a few questions coming in here, which I'll just read out actually. Ali Shabazz from Northampton University, one of our members, he's talking about resources in Iraq. How do you recruit people in Iraq? Are there any training center providers, training services for upskilling graduates to join the fintech sector? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Botan or maybe Yazin?
Botan, you want to go ahead?
It was
finding talent is not easy in Iraq, and also it's not very stable because a lot of them would leave the country. In many cases, it happened to us. So getting the right talents in Iraq is not easy. We try to recruit younger population, younger groups, and then teach them as they grow. They're more usually tech savvy, and they're more eager to learn about anything about technology. So that's been working well for us. It takes a lot of effort, but it's a great investment to do. Now, in terms of getting also expats, etc., you can find that regionally, but it's also very expensive for a business like us, where we consider ourselves startups. So we prefer to get locally. Now, the way we find them, we try to find them out of universities, maybe 1-2 years of experience. Our average age is in our company is about 26, 27. And then it takes a bit of time to teach them the basics about operating or managing the business and the projects. But after all, you'll see they're very quick to learn. I see Iraqis are very smart, especially the youth are very eager to learn and to get to know more. In terms of technology and development, there's also a big communities in Iraq that are really good at development and programming, and we're finding many of those. And whenever we can outsource certain things, we do. But yeah, recruitment is very similar to any other country. We usually resort to LinkedIn, to social media in attracting the talent, get the CVs and then the interviews, and then hire them, and then we take them through an internal or local within us training program. I'm a big believer of learning from work and not taking them to a certain course. We want them to learn what we need, and the way that we work, where be analytical, the way you manage it from a simple way, and that's been working very well for us.
Thank you very much. And there's another question here. It says, using the UK as an example, the uptake of open banking development and related services has been driven by an EU directive. For Iraq, are there central government-driven efforts to help with the spread of digital banking and fintech across the country? Yazin, perhaps you'd like to say something on that?
Can you just, I didn't get that question.
Yeah, what he's saying is a lot of the fintech and open banking was driven by EU directives in the UK. Is the same driver or regulation coming from the Iraqi government at all?
Yeah, this is a bit tricky. I mean, in many cases, there are certain individuals in the central bank who are very active and they try to push it. And there's But the majority, I see the bigger portion of the governor body are not really as interested as these few people in central bank that are helping us. So usually the initiatives would come from us, and it's a big battle to actually run after certain initiatives. So let's say, for example, we're looking at utilizing telecom data for credit scoring and financing, etc. This would all come in from the private companies going to the central bank and pushing them to at least first off accept the idea, and then find regulations around it, and then it becomes very complex. So yeah, it's driven by the companies, not the regulators in a typical situation. And even when it's driven by us, it's an uphill battle most of the time.
Okay, and now, sorry, there's one from Bawan Pashtari from Sterling Education here. Sorry to keep asking you, Yazin, but you're the guy in Iraq. Does Zain Cash have any plans for facilitating cash handling with their payment services? They currently handle that through Zain Credit Sales Points, which limits its utility to small amounts of cash. People might find it hard to trust a local mobile credit sales shop. So any plans for cash handling?
Yeah, Bawan seems to be very familiar with our model. So we actually use different groups of agents. Yes, we have. So our agents are made of a two-tier. We have the agents, which are 5,000 agents across Iraq, and then these agents are managed usually by a super agent, we call, and the super agent usually is a bank that manages the cash liquidity, and then they would go back. And by that, we can actually very quickly, even in rural areas. Now, as you've said, you're right, mobile phone shops are not the best agents to trust for cash in and cash out, and the way they handle cash usually is not very professional. So we have, let's say, 30% of our agent network that are exchange offices. So these are shops that do exchange currency, do transfers, etc., and they're also our agents. So these are the agents we utilize for usually larger cash outs. And then the other mobile phone shops we usually utilize for a smaller cash in, and then we tag them. It's a low liquidity agent versus a high liquidity agent.
Thank you. Now, I think probably that's enough for the questions at the moment. I just would like each one of you, if possible, to a quick summary of your thoughts, obviously covering quite a wide range of different issues here around fintech. Maybe, Hugo, is there anything you'd like to add, first of all, to what you've heard, or like you'd like to have put forward?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for the invite again. It's been a very useful conversation. Just from my perspective, it's just been great having all the conversation today, because although the UK markets and Iraq markets are very different, there's a lot of questions we're talking about here today that in the UK we're talking about. We're talking about how we embed different sectors and how we use telco or utilities data with financial services. We're talking about digital currency on digital cash in the UK. The Bank of England just published a report on it last month. So there are many questions on issues, on challenges we are talking about in the UK today that we'll be talking about here today. Despite there are differences in the market, I think there are many key essential topics and issues that we're also trying to challenge and tackle here in the UK. So that's what I wanted to say. Despite the differences, there are many common opportunities and challenges we're talking about here in the UK.
Thank you. Ian, would you like to comment from a more governmental perspective, perhaps, trust?
Yes, just in summary, I think there are a number of things that actually can be done to try and improve not only the take-up of fintech and all that implies, but also in terms of improving trust. And I think it comes down to trying to do a couple of things, a couple of small things well. And I think in part it's actually trying to find solutions that are relevant. A one-size-fits-all is never going to work, certainly in Iraq. The resources aren't there, the funding isn't there, the technology and the infrastructure is not there. So trying to do a few things, again, whether it's, for example, it was mentioned earlier, QR codes for merchants to facilitate contactless payments. or the adoption and the encouragement by government of low cost and very relatively low technology solutions, like in East Africa, for example, where M-Pesa has taken such a significant load off those people having to deal in cash and has enabled mobile payments fully trustworthy. And again, as it then starts to spread, the trust starts to build. The government realizes actually that this is not something that needs to be feared or overly regulated, and actually can start to take and build from there. Now, Kenya is in the lead and in the forefront in those smaller types of low-tech payments, but it's a start, and it's actually trying to ensure that the market is not over-regulated, that there are no massive, great $10 million fees payable to any new entrant in the fintech market, which I think has been a case in Iraq in some cases, and trying to actually work more closely as a partnership. That would be my final thought.
Thank you very much. I think, Yasin, how about you? Would you like to summarize the scope of things?
Yeah. Ian obviously touched on great points. Now, for us going forward, it's very important to understand the data, understand customer needs, and how we can add value at the end is to attract an individual to use us. It's not about just spending money on marketing and giving prizes for them to acquire them. Really, we want to find the needs and convince them to try this out. And we have to make that journey as easy as possible to get them on board. And once they come on board, we have to continue to keep them engaged and always show them in a way or another that digital is the right way to go. And once they see the benefit, the word of mouth is what will drive adoption. And that's what we're doing. So it's very much study the data, study the numbers, study behaviors, take advantage of certain areas or events, and try to tackle a group after another and a problem, and find for it a solution with our payments. And that's how we're growing, and that's what worked for us. And yeah, step by step, we believe that we'll get more people to be on board in financial and digital payments.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And finally, Botan, if you'd like to also comment from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, great panel. Thank you, and thanks for everyone's time. I think two things that I think is really important right now in this new environment. Everybody's trying to reduce their OPEX because everyone's trying to survive or remain profitable if they can, and they're trying to activate their businesses remotely. I think, and in order, digitizing now can help with both of those things. Fintech's development will be very much dependent on the services that you can use remote or mobile payments or electronic payments for. So I think, it's both for governments and for companies operating in Iraq, adopting digital very quickly can help them with their OPEX reduction, which will continually become unaffordable for this incoming Iraqi government, and will help them sort of manage things remotely, which the biggest worry in Iraq right now is if this continues for the next 18 months, how will citizens truly be able to access the services, the basic services that they need to usually go and queue up for, whether it's the collection of a pension or whether it's renewal of some form of license. And so I think it's the message really, I think, is to try and digitize now and to use the technologies that exist, both to reduce the OPEX costs of a business or a government, but also to help manage things remotely for them. And I think as a result of that, one of the lubricants of this is fintech. You've got to pay for things remotely, and I think that the demand has got to be there first, I think, before the supply becomes overly sophisticated. And it sounds like the supply, there's no issue with it. People like Yasin and Zain Cash and Asia Wallet and others are there ready to take on that demand, but the demand really needs to be there, generated from government and from other sectors. Unfortunately, I'm not very hopeful that there will be a top-down strategy to enable services at the moment, because we've got incoming, outgoing governments constantly at the moment in Iraq. but maybe from the private sector, there'll be more of a momentum going forward.
Well, I would thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank all 4 panelists. And I don't know about you, but I quite enjoy the direct format because it feels you're actually closer to the people than you would be if you're in a big conference room. So thank you very much. I know you're all running companies from your rooms effectively. And so there must be a lot of pressure on you. And I really appreciate this extra time you put to share with our members and the wider community. It's quite clear there's an evolutionary bottleneck going on at the moment, but as Botan said, now is the time that we can all drive forward the developments that are required with our different audiences. So firstly, thank you. Secondly, to say that if anybody would like to follow up with any questions, you can go through the Iraq Britain Business Council website, and we'll try and respond to any extra things. I think we have recorded this, so it's possible this may or may not be available depending on how people feel about it. So to be decided. But thank you all very much for logging in. I appreciate you all listening. And once again, thank you to all the panelists who've done a fantastic job. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good. Very good. Nice to meet everybody. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.